I think all of us love superhero movies so much because we get to see ourselves in these larger-than-life characters. Looking beyond all the fiction, we're really just following the stories of individuals going through personal struggles like we do, albeit in much more dramatic circumstances. I doubt any of us can relate to being a billionaire genius like Tony Stark, but I am willing to bet that at least some of us saw ourselves as he went from a person justifying his selfish actions.
And a lot of people would also call that war profiteering.
Tell me, do you plan to report on the millions we've saved by advancing medical technology or kept from starvation with our IntelliCrops? All those breakthroughs, military funding, honey.
To someone wanting to make amends after realizing his mistakes.
I just finally know what I have to do.
None of us have the power of Thor, but I'm sure a lot of us understood what he was feeling when his mom told him that.
Everyone fails at who they're supposed to be, Thor. The measure of a person, of a hero, is how well they succeed at being who they are.
It's these intimate character moments that I believe elevate the MCU films over most other superhero movies. They proudly showcase the flaws of their characters, then use those flaws to develop them over a span of films.
I lost the kid.
How much they struggle and how much they change because of those struggles make them relatable to us. But now let's focus on one character in particular.
Captain America, God's righteous man.
The leader of the Avengers, the man who always does the right thing, the world's first superhero chosen precisely because he was
A good man.
What are the flaws that he struggles with? I think one of the most interesting things about Steve is that his internal flaw is a direct result of a strong sense of duty clashing with his inner desires. This essay will be focusing on those desires and how he struggles with them throughout his entire arc in order to change your usual perspective on the completely selfless Captain America. The goal isn't to make him seem more selfish, but rather make him seem more human. It's clear from the first time we meet Steve Rogers in the first Avenger what kind of person he is. He has a strong sense of duty,
Bucky, come on, there are men laying down their lives. I got no right to do any less than them.
perseveres to fulfill that duty, whatever it takes,
No, it's not the exams I'm interested in. It's the 5 tries.
and shows no fear whenever he's challenged.
Give up, do you?
I can do this all day.
His physical transformation into Captain America doesn't change these attributes. His new powers just increase the impact he can create with them. But this transition into Steve's superhero persona, a soldier created to serve the greater good, can shift our focus away from the man standing behind the shield. What still makes Steve like us? While pursuing his goal to serve his country, Steve meets Peggy Carter, a strong woman finding her way within the male-dominated army of 1940s America. It's easy to see why Steve, a physically frail man among muscular men, almost instantly connects with her, and vice versa. Even if no romantic relationship was immediately formed, since it was their shared duty to win the war before anything else, it's heavily implied that they could and would get together after the fight was over.
In the past few years, just didn't seem to matter that much. Figured I'd wait.
For what?
Right partner.
I might, even when this is all over, go dancing.
Then what are we waiting for?
The right partner.
This is when Steve discovers his own personal desires, his wants that are separate from his duty as Captain America. But we all know what happens next. During the climax of the film, Cap finds himself alone in an armed plane, headed straight towards New York without any immediate way of stopping it. He doesn't hesitate to do what he thinks is right.
I gotta put her in the water.
Peggy immediately counters this idea.
Please, don't do this. We have time. We can work it out.
But Steve, the man whose duty it is to protect other people, doesn't compromise. He points the plane down, thinking to himself that he never got the chance to be with her, but also knowing that his duty is more important than what he wants. Steve wanted to win the war, then go home with Peggy afterwards, but he only gets one of them. In fact, he chooses to win the war over being with her. This selfless decision may present Cap as that near-flawless hero many of us view him as, which the action itself definitely proves, but I think this choice is actually the source of his future struggles. Steve wakes up 70 years in the future, runs down a street surrounded by what must be completely confusing and foreign to him. But what's the one thing on his mind?
I had a date.
This isn't the first time he's accepted that he was never getting his chance with Peggy. He already did that when he crashed the plane decades ago. Now it's about Steve accepting that he's never going to be with her while living a life knowing that. His sacrifice was never easy, but having to live through the personal consequences, he never prepared himself to do that. He doesn't get much time to reflect on this since he's immediately put in a new war in the first Avengers film. It's really in The Winter Soldier where we get to see how this haunts him. The film starts optimistic enough with Steve trying to integrate himself into the new world. In fact, the very first scene is him and Sam talking about this.
You must miss the good old days, huh?
Wow. Things aren't so bad.
We even get to see Steve visit a much older Peggy who tells him,
The world has changed. None of us can go back. All we can do is our best. And sometimes the best that we can do is to start over.
However, the film also makes sure to show Steve's reluctance to move on. During that same scene with old Peggy, he says,
And I thought I could throw myself back in and follow orders, serve. It's just not the same.
But one of the more significant interactions that I think truly shows Steve's internal conflict is his conversation with Sam after the support group session.
What you thinking about getting out?
No. I don't know. To be honest, I don't know what I would do with myself if I did.
Ultimate fighting? Just a great idea off the top of my head. But seriously, you could do whatever you want to do. What makes you happy?
I don't know.
Steve has no purpose without a war, because what he wanted to do after was already taken away from him 70 years ago. Although without a doubt, the main catalyst that fully reopens Steve's wounds and hinders him from moving on is a single character reveal.
Bucky?
Note that when Bucky presumably died in the first Avenger, Steve already had some time to mourn and accept his death, so finding a major piece of his old life again this suddenly, his best friend whom he grew up with and thought was gone forever, rekindles a powerful spark of Steve's past and his desire for that past. Though of course, it isn't as simple as two friends reuniting, since Bucky is now a mind-controlled killer used by Steve's former World War II nemesis. Throughout the film, Captain America only really fights him before he finds out his true identity. Although Steve does fight him one more time during the climactic battle on the helicarrier, this is only because Bucky is in the way of stopping Hydra from killing people. Just like in the end of the first Avenger, Steve is putting his duty of protecting others over his own personal desires. But this time, he actually gets the chance to finish his mission and deal with his own wants after. He drops his shield and tries to get Bucky to regain his memories. Bucky thrashes him, but Steve doesn't fight back. He'd rather die trying than accept that his best friend is gone, that any trace of his old life is gone forever. The movie ends with Bucky escaping and Natasha handing Steve files that could lead to him. She tells Steve to
Call that nurse?
in reference to her earlier remarks.
What about the nurse that lives across the hall from you? She seems kind of nice.
You know, if you ask Kristen out from statistics, she'd probably say yes.
Oh, wait, what about that girl from accounting? Laura?
Lillian. Lip piercing, right?
Yeah, she's cute.
Yeah. I'm not ready for that. What was her name again?
Sharon. She's nice.
Steve replies playfully, maybe hinting that he still wants to give a chance to moving on in the current world. But immediately after that, he looks at Bucky's files and expresses his desire to go after him. The movie literally ends with Steve turning away from an opportunity to move on and instead committing to find a part of the past. This whole predicament with Bucky is basically Steve's outlet for his inner conflict. He's unable to effectively do anything about his personal desires except to move on. But instead of doing that, he's consumed by a ghost of his past. Although Steve might already be acting selfish here with how stubborn he is, his intentions are still ultimately good since Bucky had no control over his horrific actions. It's in a later film that we see the real consequences of Steve's undying fidelity to his best friend.
Pretending you could live without a war
This idea harkens back to that conversation he had with Sam about not knowing what to do if he quit, and is further reinforced with his nightmare sequence in Age of Ultron. If you notice, Steve is the only one to have a seemingly happy dream. Bruce rages as the Hulk, Nat remembers her dark past, Thor sees Ragnarok, and Tony, he witnesses the death of the Avengers. It's all of their deepest fears, yet Steve's dream is his friends celebrating post-war, along with Peggy wanting to dance with him. Why is this his nightmare? The dream ends with everyone in the room, except Steve, disappearing. He's alone. His chance to live a life with Peggy has long faded away, yet his desire hasn't. But that's all he has left, the desire, no longer the chance.
We can go home.
And he can't move on. He has no purpose without the war, so he just continues to fight. There are a few key scenes that show Steve being haunted by his past, while he chooses to keep to himself.
Who's the girl?
Well, home is home, you know?
Steve shows the most emotion during his argument with Stark.
I don't trust a guy without a dark side. Call me old-fashioned.
Well, let's just say you haven't seen it yet.
Steve knows he hasn't been open about what's been bothering him for a while now. The conversation escalates.
Isn't that the mission? Isn't that the why we fight? So we can end the fight? So we get to go home?
This, along with that scene with Sam, shows how uncomfortable Steve is with the notion of going home. Age of Ultron ends with the realization.
Family, stability. Guy who wanted all that went in the ice 75 years ago. I think someone else came out.
The movie makes you think that his arc ends here, with Cap coming to terms with his nightmares. He's accepting his new purpose to be the leader of the Avengers. He even says,
I'm home.
All makes you think that he's finally moved on, that his desires for his old life are gone at last. But his next appearance in the series shows exactly the opposite of all of that. The Sokovia Accords may have instigated the conflict between Steve and Tony in Civil War, but it was Bucky's involvement that made it personal for both sides. Nobody was absolutely right or wrong regarding the Accords, since the differing ideals of Steve and Tony were driven by personal experiences that shaped who they were at that point in the film series. Without going into too much detail, Steve's view was mainly influenced when he found out Hydra had been in S.H.I.E.L.D. for decades, while Tony's was mostly from guilt for creating Ultron. The two only actually begin fighting once the Accords direct Iron Man to capture Bucky, which Cap obviously won't allow. But Steve isn't just doing this to save his friend. He's also trying to help Bucky stop the other Winter Soldiers, so his duty of protecting people is still a major motivator at this point in the film. But Zemo's red herring is revealed that he already killed the other Winter Soldiers and just wanted to get Iron Man, Cap, and Bucky in the same room. It's shown that Bucky killed Tony's parents, and the fight between the two Avengers immediately and completely changes context. Steve isn't fighting Tony anymore to save the greater good. He's only doing it to protect his best friend now. It isn't as simple as the previous conflict in The Winter Soldier, where saving Bucky didn't really have any major consequences. With this one, Cap is well aware that what he's doing means fighting his fellow hero, teammate, and friend.
He's my friend. So was I.
He knows that this could break the Avengers apart. The team he said was his home, which we can now clearly see he didn't mean. Although he doesn't have many scenes in Infinity War, the Avengers losing against Thanos was an indirect consequence of Steve's actions in Civil War. The team was split, and Cap himself knew that they had to be united when faced with their greatest threats.
That up there, that's the end game. How are you guys planning on beating that?
Together.
We'll lose.
And we'll do that together too.
As they were when they successfully defeated Loki and later Ultron. But what happened when they weren't? Steve even witnesses Bucky, the man he fought so hard for and broke the Avengers apart for, turn into dust right in front of him. Steve both failed in his duty to protect people and in his desire to keep his past alive. At the beginning of Endgame, we see Steve and Tony meet for the first time since Civil War, and I absolutely adore this small moment. Among the people that includes Tony's wife and lifelong best friend, it's the man he fought and hadn't spoken to in 2 years that rushes to get him. In spite of this, Tony still clearly harbors resentment against Steve.
And I needed you. As in past tense. That trumps what you need. It's too late, buddy.
Tony blames him for what happened with Thanos, and Steve himself doesn't disagree with anything because he knows it's all true.
Well, that didn't work out, did it?
I said we'd lose. You said, we'll do that together too. And guess what, Cap? We lost. And you weren't there.
Fast forward 5 years later, and Cap finds himself trying to move on again. But there's something different. For the first time in 11 years, Steve Rogers finally admits what he's been struggling with ever since he woke up in the future.
I went in the ice in 45 right after I met the love of my life. Woke up 70 years later. You gotta move on. You gotta move on.
This may not have been the actual first time he's ever said this, but showing it on screen for the first time after years of showing Steve keeping it to himself is a massive, massive change. It took half the universe dying, including his best friend, for him to finally admit this. Once the Avengers find a way to undo Thanos' snap, Steve puts his head down with the new yet familiar purpose and duty to save the people he and the rest of the Avengers failed. He and Tony also make up in a very subtle yet completely faithful to their characters' way.
Turns out resentment is corrosive, and I hate it.
Me too.
It also leads to one of the best scenes of Endgame, with Cap getting his shield back while his theme song plays in the background.
Thank you, Tony.
During the time heist, we see the MCU's big three each come into paths with a person they loved and lost. But notice how only Tony and Thor get to actually speak with theirs. Those two scenes were fantastic on their own, but Steve walking into a dark room, seeing a picture of his old skinny self, and you know what? I'm just gonna let you watch. In an 11-year superhero movie franchise, my favorite scene in its climactic final film has no action sequences, no epic scale battle. Hell, it doesn't even have any dialogue. It's a simple character moment that might not even seem that much on its own, but with how carefully the MCU has developed Steve Rogers over the years, everything he's been through, the choices and mistakes he's made, the struggles, all of that gives weight to this one single scene. After spending more than a decade longing for, but knowing he could never get it, he sees his chance unexpectedly, by accident even. Everything he's ever wanted is literally right there standing in front of him. Everything he knew he wanted in the first Avenger, everything he longed for in The Winter Soldier, everything he tried to deny himself of in Age of Ultron, and everything he fought for in Civil War, right there in front of him. This is his second chance to be with Peggy after choosing his duty over her all those years ago. He can hand Tony the PIM particles and tell him to go back alone, while Steve stays here to live the life he's always wanted to. But what does he do? He looks at her, says nothing, then puts his head down. He's putting his duty over his desires. Again. Even the music playing is exactly the same as when he crashed the plane all those years ago. He's making the same choice, even if it was the choice that's been causing him so much pain ever since. Steve doesn't know if he'll get the chance to go back, if the mission to save half the universe will allow him to, but he still chooses to do the right thing. He knows he can't abandon the Avengers again with what they're about to do. During his final war, Steve picks up Thor's hammer, the ultimate symbol of worthiness in the MCU, something he's proven time and time again, but I argue none more than when he gave up his second chance to be with Peggy. Once the dust settles, Steve yet again finds himself in a world after a war, but this time, he isn't forced to move on anymore. He goes home, his true home, the home he's always been denied of. The man who sacrificed his entire life to save the greater good finally gets the life he's always wanted. Steve Rogers was never perfect, either as the skinny kid from Brooklyn or the righteous leader of the Avengers. He had his own desires and struggled when they clashed with what he believed was the right thing to do. That conflict led him to do some awful things with even worse consequences. But Steve owned up to his mistakes, learned to live with the consequences, and made sure to make up for them, even if it meant giving up what he wanted the most. At the end of the day, Captain America is still one of the most humble, principled, and admirable characters, not just in the MCU, but in basically any superhero story. So seeing even him struggle with his flaws just reminds us how all these heroes are ultimately just like us, human.